The old above-ground pool had been the heart of the summer for a decade. It was a 24-foot circle of manufactured joy, a vinyl-lined oasis where Tom's children, Leo and Mia, had cannonballed away their childhoods. Now, Mia was away. At college, and Leo, at 17, was more interested in the clatter of a skateboard on pavement than the splash of chlorinated water. The pool had become a monument to a time that was over, a high-maintenance, money-sucking, leaf-collecting relic. Taking it down felt like a rite of passage. "You sure you want to do this, Dad?" Leo asked, holding a utility knife with the reverence of a surgeon. He stood on the sun-bleached deck, his shadow long in the late August morning. Tom nodded, pulling on a pair of worn leather gloves. "It's time. The filter pump is shot. Hey, liner's got a slow leak, and your mother's been on me for years about the electricity bill." He didn't mention the other reason, that looking at it, empty and still, felt like staring into a grave. The first cut into the liner was the hardest. The blade bit into the thick blue vinyl with a violent tearing sound. Water, smelling of stale chlorine and forgotten summers, gushed out, flooding the yard in a final, messy goodbye. For hours, they worked under the oppressive sun, a father-son. Demolition team, dismantling the skeletal frame of 1,000 memories. They rolled up the heavy, waterlogged liner, unscrewed rusted bolts, and stacked the curved metal wall panels into a gleaming silver pile by the curb. It was hard, sweaty, satisfying work. By late afternoon, all that remained was a massive, perfectly circular patch of pale, compressed dirt where a lawn used to be. It looked like a crop circle, a scar on the otherwise green expanse of his backyard. "Whoa," Leo said, wiping his forehead with the back of a muddy hand. "Looks naked." "We'll get some topsoil, reseed it. By next spring, you won't even know it was here," Tom said, trying to convince himself as much as his son. That's when he saw her. Karen. She was standing at the chain-link fence that separated their properties, her arms crossed tightly over a pastel-pink polo shirt. Her blonde hair was sculpted into a helmet of immovable perfection, and her face was a mask of polite, simmering inquiry. Karen and her husband, a perpetually silent man named Bob, had lived next door for 15 years. Their interactions had always been surface-level cordial, limited to strained waves and clipped discussions about property lines. "Thomas," she called out, her voice carrying a sharp, bird-like quality. "Having a bit of a clear-out?" Tom forced a weary smile. "Hey, Karen. Yeah, the old girl finally gave up the ghost, decided to reclaim the yard." Karen's eyes, small and critical, scanned the scene. The pile of metal, the muddy ground, the giant circle of dirt. A faint line appeared between her meticulously shaped eyebrows. "Reclaim it for what exactly?" "Just grass. A lawn. Maybe a fire pit next year." She tilted her head, a gesture that managed to be both curious and condescending. "A fire pit? The HOA has very specific regulations on open flames, you know. Section C, paragraph 4. "I'll look into it," Tom said, his smile tightening. "It's just," she continued, her gaze drifting past him and up toward her own house. "That pool was such a lovely feature. From our master bedroom, it gave the impression of a water view. Very tranquil. It really elevated the feel of the block." Tom blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. Her water view? It was a 24-foot plastic tub. Well, it was a lot of work to maintain. One has to make sacrifices for aesthetics, Thomas. A neighborhood is a tapestry. If one person starts pulling at a thread, the whole thing can unravel. She gave the patch of dirt a look of profound disgust. "This is going to be quite the eyesore while it recovers." "It's just dirt, Karen. Grass will grow." "We'll see," she said, her voice dropping the pretense of friendliness. It was a warning. She turned without another word and marched back to her perfectly manicured patio, disappearing inside her house. Leo looked at his dad. What was that about? That, Tom sighed, picking up a stray bolt, was about her water view. The next few days were a blur of yard work. Tom rented a rototiller, churning the compacted earth into a soft, dark bed. He had 6 cubic yards of topsoil delivered, which he and Leo spread with shovels and rakes until their backs screamed in protest. The circle was no longer a pale scar, but a rich, promising brown. They scattered grass seed and covered it with a fine layer of peat moss. Tom set up a sprinkler, and the gentle ch-ch-ch of the oscillating water became the new sound of the backyard. Every time he was outside, he felt her eyes on him, a flicker of movement in her upstairs window, a shadow behind the blinds. It was a constant, unnerving surveillance. The passive aggression started a week later. That sprinkler seems to be overspraying onto my petunias, Thomas, she shouted from her deck one evening. They're very delicate. He adjusted the sprinkler's arc, even though the mist wasn't coming within 10 feet of her flower bed. The following Saturday, as he was mowing the rest of the lawn, she appeared at the fence again. The noise from that tiller the other day was simply dreadful. It went on for hours. My bichon frise has been an anxious wreck ever since. Sorry about that, Tom said, not bothering to turn off the mower. But the real escalation came in the form of a letter. It was tucked into his mailbox, a crisp white envelope with the logo of the Ridgewood Commons Homeowners Association. His stomach clenched as he opened it. It was a formal notice of violation. It cited a rule about maintaining property in an aesthetically pleasing condition, and mentioned a large, barren patch of land that was detracting from the community's visual standards. He was given 30 days to remediate the issue. There was no doubt who had filed the complaint. Can she do that? Leo asked, reading the letter over his dad's shoulder. Apparently, Tom muttered, crumpling the paper in his fist. It's fine. The grass is already starting to sprout. In 30 days, it'll be green. It's a non-issue. He was wrong. It was the issue. The only issue. A week later, after a heavy overnight rain, he was woken on a Sunday morning by a frantic pounding on his front door. He stumbled downstairs, pulling on a t-shirt, to find Karen on his stoop, her face a thunderous mask of rage. Bob stood silently behind her, looking at his shoes. "This is completely unacceptable," she shrieked, foregoing any greeting. "Karen! What's wrong? What's wrong?" She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Your little landscaping project has completely altered the drainage grade of your yard. All the water is sheeting directly into my prize-winning rose garden. You are drowning my Queen Elizabeths." Tom was dumbfounded. "That's impossible. The yard slopes the same way it always has. If anything, the tilled soil should absorb more water. Don't you dare tell me what I am seeing with my own 2 eyes." She jabbed a finger toward her house. "I have documented the damage. My roses are ruined. They are irreplaceable. You will be hearing from my lawyer." This was it. The line. He had been patient. He had been polite. He was done. "Karen," he said, his voice dangerously low. "There is no new drainage issue. You've been looking for something, anything, to complain about since I took down that pool, and this is what you've invented. You are harassing me, and I want it to stop. Stay off my property." Her jaw dropped. Her face went from red to a mottled, unhealthy white. She was so used to being in control, so used to people capitulating to her demands, that the direct confrontation left her momentarily speechless. Bob shuffled his feet. You will regret this," she finally sputtered, her voice trembling with venom. She spun around and stormed back across the lawn, dragging Bob in her wake. Tom slammed the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the righteous anger of a man pushed too far. He had stood up to the bully. He had drawn a line in the sand. For 2 weeks, there was silence. Blessed, wonderful silence. The new grass was coming in thick and green, a vibrant emerald circle. He didn't see Karen at the fence. The blinds in her window remained still. He allowed himself to think, foolishly, that it was over. That his defiance had worked. Then the certified letter arrived. It was different from the HOA notice. The envelope was thick, heavy with consequence. The return address was a law firm downtown, Myers, Abernathy, and Finch. His hands felt cold and clumsy as he tore it open. He scanned the dense, jargon-filled paragraphs, his blood turning to ice water. It was a formal notice of intent, a prelude to a lawsuit. The words leaped off the page, each one a hammer blow. Negligent. Alteration of landscape topography. Creation of a public and private nuisance. Willful destruction of neighboring property value. Resultant hydrological trespass causing significant material damage. The claims were insane, a shotgun blast of legal threats based on her fantasy of a flooded rose garden. But it was the list of demands at the end that stole his breath. She was demanding that he, at his own expense, hire a state-licensed civil engineer to conduct a full topographical survey of both properties to assess the full extent of the altered water runoff. She was demanding that he pay for an independent real estate appraiser to determine the diminished value of her home now that its premier water view had been replaced by a barren mud pit, and she was demanding he immediately pay a preliminary sum of $15,000 to cover the horticultural replacement costs for her allegedly damaged roses and for her legal fees to date. Failure to comply within 10 business days would result in a lawsuit seeking over. The high-pitched whine of the kettle seemed to drill directly into Tom's skull. He stood frozen in the middle of his kitchen, the lawyer's letter a dead weight in his hand. The paper, crisp and official, felt alien, a hostile artifact from a world of calculated malice he didn't understand. "Dad?" Leo's voice was closer now, tinged with alarm. "What is it? Is Grandma okay?" Tom finally looked up from the page, his eyes struggling to focus on his son. He saw the genuine fear in Leo's face, and a wave of protective fury washed over him, momentarily eclipsing his own shock. He was a father. He was supposed to be the shield, the one who made sense of the world's chaos, but this was an attack he hadn't seen coming. "Everything's fine," he lied, his voice a hoarse croak. He folded the letter with a shaking hand and placed it on the counter, as if hiding it would negate its power. "It's nothing, just a neighborhood dispute." Leo wasn't buying it. He'd seen his dad angry, sad, frustrated. He'd never seen this look before, a hollowed-out expression of sheer disbelief. A dispute? That looked like more than a letter from the HOA. He gestured toward the expensive stationery. "Who are Myers, Abernathy, and Finch?" Tom ran a hand through his hair, the gesture frantic. "They're her lawyers." The words tasted like poison. "Karen's. She's threatening to sue." Sue for what? "The grass grew back," Leo exclaimed, his voice cracking with teenage indignation. He walked to the kitchen window and pointed. "Look, it's a lawn. It's what she wanted." "It's not about the grass, Leo. It was never about the grass." Tom sank onto a kitchen stool, the strength draining from his legs. He felt old. She's claiming taking the pool down changed the shape of the yard and flooded her rose bushes. She says I've destroyed her property value because she can't see the water view anymore." Leo stared at him, his mouth agape. "That's insane. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. A judge would laugh her out of court." "I hope so," Tom said grimly, but a cold dread was already coiling in his gut. People didn't hire law firms with names like Myers, Abernathy, and Finch to be laughed out of court. They hired them to inflict pain. The $100,000 figure from the letter blazed in his mind. It was a number designed to terrify. It was working. That was more than he had in his entire retirement account. It was the college fund. It was everything. Sleep offered no escape that night. He tossed and turned, his mind a frantic carousel of disastrous scenarios. Courtrooms, foreclosures, the pitying looks of his other neighbors. He saw Karen's smug, triumphant face, her perfect blonde helmet gleaming under the fluorescent lights of a courthouse hallway. He woke up before dawn in a cold sweat, the legal jargon from the letter echoing in his ears. Hydrological trespass, diminished value, willful destruction. He knew he couldn't fight this alone. He found David Chen through a referral from a co-worker. His office was in a modest building downtown, a world away from the mahogany and marble fortress implied by Karen's letterhead. David was a man in his late 40s with a kind, weary face and a calm demeanor that immediately put Tom on edge. He wanted a bulldog, a shark. David looked like a high school history teacher. Tom laid the letter on the polished surface of David's desk. "She's trying to ruin me," he said, the words coming out flatter and more defeated than he intended. David read the letter slowly, his expression unchanging. He read it a second time, his lips pursed. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Tom over his glasses. "Well," he said, his voice even, "this is a classic, a work of art, really." "A work of art?" Tom balked. "She's demanding $15,000 and threatening to sue for $100,000 over a non-existent puddle." "Tom, the law and reality are often two very different things," David said, steepling his fingers. "This letter isn't designed to win in court. It's designed to make you panic and pay her to go away. It's a shakedown, pure and simple. Her lawyer likely specializes in this. They fire off these cannonball letters, loaded with terrifying language, and 90% of the time, the recipient gets scared, writes a check for $10,000 to make it disappear, and the lawyer takes a third. It's a business model." A tiny flicker of hope ignited in Tom's chest. "So it's frivolous. We can get it thrown out." David held up a hand. "Easy. Frivolous is a very high legal bar to clear. To you and me, it's insane. In the eyes of the court, she's claiming damages. As long as her lawyer can frame it with a straight face, a judge might let it proceed to discovery. And that's where they get you. Discovery? Depositions, interrogatories, requests for documents. They'll want to depose you for hours, asking you the same questions over and over. They'll depose your son. They'll hire their own experts. A friendly engineer who will find the exact drainage problem they're looking for. An appraiser who will cry crocodile tears over the lost water view. We'll have to hire our own experts to refute them. All of this costs money. A lot of money." The flicker of hope died. "So what you're saying is, even if I'm completely in the right, I could go broke proving it." "I'm saying this is the reality," David said, his gaze direct and unflinching. "Winning could cost you $30,000 to $40,000 in legal and expert fees, maybe more if she drags it out. And there's no guarantee you'd be able to recover those fees from her, even if you win." Tom felt sick. He thought of his mortgage, of Mia's tuition, of the promise he'd made to Leo to help with a down payment on a car. All of it, vaporized, all because he took down a swimming pool. "What do I do?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. "First, you breathe," David said. "Second, you don't engage with her. Not a word. Don't even look at her. If she tries to talk to you, you walk away. Third, you document everything. Take pictures of your yard. Take pictures of her yard. Take a video showing where the water goes when you run a sprinkler near the property line. Get today's newspaper in the shot so everything is dated. We need to build our own file. And fourth, we respond. What do we say? We say no," David said with the first hint of a smile. "Politely, of course. We send a letter from my office stating that her claims are without merit and that any attempt to pursue this baseless action will be met with a vigorous defense. We call her bluff. We see if she's willing to spend her own money to file the actual suit." He leaned forward. "This is going to be a nerve-wracking couple of weeks, Tom. You have to be prepared for that." Tom left the office with a $3,000 retainer charged to his credit card and a stomach full of acid. That evening, he followed David's instructions, walking his property line with his phone, feeling like a spy in his own backyard. He took photos of Karen's pristine, unflooded rose bushes. He recorded a long, tedious video of his sprinkler running, the water soaking harmlessly into his new lawn, yards away from her property. The whole time, he felt the oppressive weight of her gaze from the window. He saw her newest addition, next day. Mounted on the corner of her house, aimed like a turret, was a brand new, gleaming white security camera. It wasn't pointed at her own yard or the street. It was aimed directly at the circle of new grass where his pool had been. A tiny red light glowed, a malevolent, sleepless eye. She was documenting him. The psychological warfare had begun. Every time he stepped outside, he felt it. The camera was a constant, silent accusation. It made his own home feel like a prison yard. Mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, sitting on his deck with a beer, all of it was being recorded, archived, waiting to be twisted into evidence against him. Leo felt it too, refusing to hang out with his friends in the backyard anymore. "It's creepy, Dad. It's like she's always watching." A week after his meeting with David, the response came. It wasn't a letter. It was an email from David, with an attachment. The subject line was simply, "Update on your case." Tom's hand trembled as he clicked it open. "Tom," the email began, "as expected, they've rejected our position. The plaintiff's counsel has informed me they are proceeding with the lawsuit. They have also taken an additional highly aggressive step. They have filed a lease pendens on your property. I've attached the filing. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss." Lis pendens. The term was Latin, alien, and terrifying. He clicked on the attachment, a scanned legal document stamped by the county clerk's office. He didn't understand most of it, but he understood the heading, Notice of Pending Action. And he understood his own name and his address, printed in stark black and white. He immediately called David. "What is it?" Tom asked, his voice tight with panic. "What is a lis pendens?" David's sigh was heavy, even through the phone. "It's Latin for suit pending. It's a public notice filed in the county property records, informing anyone who looks that there is an active lawsuit involving the title to your property." "But the lawsuit is about money, about damages. It's not about who owns my house." Her lawyer is framing it as a dispute involving the land itself, the grading, the property value, the nuisance you've created. It's a stretch, but it's just legitimate enough for the clerk to accept the filing, and its effect is immediate and devastating. A cold void opened in Tom's stomach. "What effect?" "It means your property has a cloud on its title," David said, his voice grim and devoid of any comforting platitudes. "As of today, you cannot sell your house. You cannot refinance your mortgage or take out a home equity loan. No bank or title company will touch it until the lawsuit is resolved." And the term lis pendens became the epicenter of Tom's world. It was a legal construct, an abstraction of ink on paper in a dusty county file, yet it felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. It was a brand on his home, a public declaration of his entanglement. He was no longer just a homeowner, he was a defendant. Explaining it to Leo was one of the hardest things he'd ever had to do. He sat his son down at the kitchen table, the I-Day, same table where they'd celebrated birthdays and struggled through homework, and laid out the grim reality. "It means the house is frozen," Tom said, his voice flat. "We can't sell it, can't borrow against it. It's tied up in this thing until it's over." Leo's face hardened, the last vestiges of teenage carelessness giving way to a premature, bitter maturity. "So we're trapped here? Next to her? For now. For how long?" Tom had asked David the same question. The answer had been a non-committal shrug. "Months? A year? If it goes to trial, maybe 2. The system isn't fast." "I don't have an answer, Leo," Tom admitted. "We just have to fight it." But the fight wasn't a single, glorious battle. It was a slow, grinding siege designed to exhaust his spirit and his bank account. The discovery process began. A thick package arrived from David's office containing the plaintiff's first set of interrogatories and requests for production. It was over 100 questions, a labyrinth of legalese and thinly veiled accusations. Identify every person who assisted you in the deconstruction of the aqueous recreational structure. Detail, in chronological order, every step you took to prepare the soil for the planting of new grass. State your annual income for the preceding 5 years. Have you ever been formally cited for any other violations of community standards or local ordinances? The questions were intrusive, repetitive, and utterly exhausting. He and David spent a full Saturday in David's office, hunched over the documents, crafting answers that were truthful but gave away nothing. Every word was a potential landmine. "Deconstruction of the aqueous recreational structure," Tom said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean when Leo and I tore down the damn pool?" "That's exactly what you'll write," David said, not looking up. "My son Leo and I dismantled the above-ground swimming pool. Use plain English. Don't use their inflammatory language." With the interrogatories came the request for documents. They wanted receipts for the topsoil, the user manual for the rototiller, photos of the pool before it was removed, his property tax statements. It was a paper war, and he was the sole soldier on his side, digging through old file cabinets and online banking records for scraps of ammunition. Meanwhile, Karen intensified her psychological campaign. The war was no longer confined to lawyers and paperwork. It spilled out into the neighborhood. He began to notice the subtle shifts. Mrs. Gable, from 2 doors down, who always stopped to chat about her hydrangeas, now found her sidewalk fascinating whenever he walked by. The Nelson kids, who used to cut through his yard to get to the park, now took the long way around. Karen was poisoning the well. He could almost hear her narrative, whispered over fences and during HOA meetings. Poor Tom. He's so angry since the divorce. He's deliberately destroyed his yard to spite the neighborhood. Now he's being so unreasonable, refusing to take responsibility for the damage. She was painting herself as the victim, the lone guardian of community standards, and him as the unstable, resentful outlier. He was being socially isolated, block by block. The final illusion of privacy was shattered one sunny Saturday. He and Leo were in the backyard trying to salvage some semblance of normalcy with a barbecue. The smell of grilling burgers filled the air, a fleeting ghost of happier times. Then came the noise, a high-pitched, insect-like buzzing from above. Tom looked up. Hovering about 30 feet over his lawn was a white drone. Its camera, a single, black eye was pointed directly at them. It moved with an unnerving, predatory stillness, its propellers a high-frequency taunt. "You have got to be kidding me," Leo breathed, his hamburger forgotten on his plate. There was no doubt whose it was. It had taken off from Karen's yard and was now trespassing in his airspace, another instrument of surveillance. Another way to tell him, "You have no sanctuary. I am always watching." Something inside Tom, already stretched taut by weeks of anxiety and pressure, finally snapped. "Get that thing out of my yard," he roared, his voice raw with fury. He looked around wildly, his eyes landing on the bag of charcoal briquettes. He grabbed one, a black, dusty rock, and hurled it at the drone. It was a pathetic, useless gesture. The briquette sailed 10 feet in the air and fell harmlessly to the grass. The drone didn't flinch, it just hovered, watching. "Recording." "Dad, don't!" Leo pleaded, grabbing his arm. "That's what she wants! She wants you to look crazy!" Leo was right. Tom deflated, the rage replaced by a wave of cold, nauseating shame. He was a middle-aged man throwing charcoal at a robot in his own backyard while his neighbor filmed him. He had become a character in her sick little play. He looked up at the drone, then at Karen's window where he could see her silhouette. He gave her nothing more. He calmly packed up the food, shut down the grill, and went inside, the buzzing of the drone following him like a persistent jeer. The legal bills started, arriving from David's firm, itemized lists of his dwindling finances. Phone call with client, 0.5 hours. Draft response to interrogatories, 3.5 hours. Review of plaintiff's documents, 2.0 hours. Each line item was a punch to the gut. The $3,000 retainer was gone in a flash. The next bill was for $4,000. The one after that was closer to $5,000. He was paying a fortune for the privilege of being miserable. The day of his deposition arrived like a death sentence. David had prepped him for hours. Her lawyer's name is Abernathy. He's a peacock. He's going to try to provoke you. He wants to create moments for a highlight reel to show a jury. Don't give them to him. Keep your answers short. Yes. No. I don't recall. Let him drown in the silence. The conference room at Abernathy's. Firm was designed to intimidate. The table was a vast, polished expanse of dark wood. The chairs were black leather. Tom sat next to David, across from Abernathy and Karen. Abernathy was exactly as David had described. Perfect suit, expensive watch, and a smile that never reached his cold reptilian eyes. Karen sat beside him, a vision of composed victimhood, in a beige pantsuit, a legal pad in front of her on which she never wrote a word. Her presence was a constant, suffocating pressure. A court reporter sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her machine. The first 2 hours were a tedious blur of the same questions from the interrogatories. Abernathy's voice was a smooth, condescending drone. Tom stuck to the script, his answers clipped and emotionless. He could feel Abernathy's frustration growing. Then the lawyer shifted gears. "Mr. Henderson," Abernathy said, leaning forward. "Let's talk about your temperament. Would you say you're a man prone to impulsive decisions?" "No," Tom said. "Really? You decided to tear down a major landscape feature, a 24-foot swimming pool, over a single weekend, with no professional consultation. That doesn't sound impulsive?" "It was old and broken. I decided to remove it. Just like your marriage," Abernathy said, the words sliding like silk off his tongue. "That also ended rather abruptly, didn't it?" David immediately straightened. "Objection. This has no relevance to the matter at hand." "Oh, I believe it does, counsel," Abernathy countered, never taking his eyes off Tom. "It speaks to a pattern of behavior, a pattern of destroying things of value when they become inconvenient. Your ex-wife, Lisa, cited your unpredictable temper in her divorce filings, did she not?" It was a lie, a grotesque, deliberate distortion of the most painful period of his life. His divorce had been amicable, a mutual, sorrowful drifting apart. There were no filings about his temper. Abernathy had taken a private grief and twisted it into a weapon. Tom saw red. The sterile conference room, the smug lawyer, the silent watching Karen, it all coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure. David's warnings, the script, the strategy, all of it evaporated in a white-hot flash of rage. "You son of a bitch!" Tom snarled, leaning forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Please note the witness's agitation," Abernathy said calmly to the court reporter. "Don't you dare talk about my family!" Tom's voice rose to a shout, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "This has nothing to do with my family. This is about you and this ambulance-chasing parasite firm and that miserable woman right there trying to extort money from me because I took down a goddamn kiddie pool." "Tom, stop," David said, his hand on Tom's arm. But Tom shook it off. He pointed a trembling finger at Abernathy. "You're a liar. You're twisting my life to fit your disgusting narrative. You have no shame. You have no decency." The room was silent except for Tom's heavy breathing and the quiet clicking of the stenotype machine. Abernathy leaned back in his chair, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had his moment. The deposition ended shortly after. Tom sat in the now empty room, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him cold and hollow. The silence was deafening. He had walked right into the trap. David finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. "He'll use that." Tom didn't have to ask what he meant. He knew. The outburst, the rage, his face, contorted in anger, captured on high-definition video. He slowly looked over the kitchen table, which had served as a monument to Tom's despair for months, was now a command center buzzing with a new, dangerous energy. The screen glowed with the evidence. The original property survey, a clean and simple rectangle, displayed, next to the satellite image of Karen's house, now marred by the cancerous growth of her illegal addition. It was more than a smoking gun. It was the blueprints to the entire fraudulent enterprise. Tom picked up the phone and called David, his voice devoid of the panic and exhaustion that had defined their recent conversations. It was calm, steady, and cold. "David, it's Tom Henderson," he said. "I need you to withdraw our response to the settlement offer. We're going to be making a counter-demand." He laid out what he and Leo had found, explaining the timeline, the lack of permits, the discrepancy in the surveys. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Tom worried David would dismiss it as a desperate tactic. But when David finally spoke, his voice was transformed. The weary resignation was gone, replaced by the sharp, energized focus of a predator that had just caught the scent of blood. "Tom, are you certain about this? I'm looking at the official county and city records right now. It's irrefutable." A slow, audible exhale came through the phone. "My God," David murmured. "Tom, this isn't just a shield. You don't understand. In the world of petty litigation, this is a tactical nuclear weapon. She built her entire case on the view from a room that legally shouldn't exist. So what do? "We don't do anything," David said, a newfound relish in his voice. "We don't negotiate. We don't compromise. We dictate terms. I'll have a letter on Abernathy's desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow." The letter David drafted was a work of art, a masterpiece of legal destruction. It was short, brutal, and left no room for interpretation. It listed in precise, unemotional detail the evidence of the unpermitted construction, citing the specific public records. Then came the terms of surrender. 1. The immediate, unconditional withdrawal of their lawsuit, filed with prejudice, ensuring it could never be resurrected. 2. The immediate filing of a legal release for the Ellis Pendens, with confirmation delivered to his lawyer's office within 24 hours. 3. A certified check for the full amount of Tom's legal fees to date, $13,784.50, payable to Thomas Henderson. The letter concluded with a single, devastating sentence. If these non-negotiable terms are not met in full within 48 hours, a comprehensive file of our findings will be delivered to the City of Ridgewood Code Enforcement Department and the Ridgewood Commons HOA Architectural Review Committee. There was no bluff. There was only the cold, hard certainty of mutual assured destruction, except only one of their houses was built on a lie. The next afternoon, Tom was in the yard, raking leaves, feeling the sun on his face. For what felt like the first time in months, he was waiting. The 48-hour clock was ticking. He saw a movement at the fence line and his muscles tensed. It was Karen, marching toward him, her face a familiar mask of righteous indignation. She had clearly not yet spoken to her lawyer. "Thomas," she called out, her voice sharp, "I've been expecting your signed acceptance of our very generous offer. Don't be a fool and drag this out any further." Tom stopped raking. He leaned the rake against the fence and walked calmly toward her, stopping a few feet away. Looked at her, truly looked at her. For the first time, not as a victim, but as a biologist studying a particularly venomous specimen. He felt no anger, no fear. He felt nothing but a profound, cleansing pity. "The offer has been rejected, Karen," he said, his voice even. She scoffed. "Rejected? On what grounds? Your lawyer must have told you what that deposition video will do to you in front of a jury." "I'm not worried about the deposition," he said. "But you should be. See, I've been looking at some videos of my own, old ones, from about 15 years ago, actually. Property surveys, to be specific." The armor of her self-assurance began to crack. A flicker of confusion, of uncertainty, crossed her face. "I also took a look at the city's building permits for your address," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's funny. The city is so meticulous. They have records for everything, plumbing, electrical, but they seem to have misplaced the permit for your entire second-story master bedroom suite. You know, the one you built 3 years ago? The one with what did you call it? The water view." Every trace of color drained from Karen's face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The mask didn't just crack. It shattered, revealing the panicked, terrified fraud underneath. "My lawyer sent yours. A letter this morning," Tom said, pressing his advantage. "He's probably calling you right about now. I'd take the call if I were you." "You have until 9 a.m. Friday morning to make this right. After that, your little secret gets a much wider audience." She stared at him, her eyes wide with a horror so complete it was almost pitiable. She looked from Tom to her own house, as if seeing the illegal addition for the first time. She turned without another word and practically ran back inside. The back door slammed shut, the sound echoing the final, definitive end of her war. The call from David came the next morning at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the deadline. "It's done," David said, and for the first time, Tom could hear him smiling. "Abernathy called me at the crack of dawn. Sounded like he'd been up all night. He was shouting at first, blustering about extortion. I just yawned. A few hours later, he called back, a changed man. The withdrawal and the lies pendants release are being filed with the court as we speak. A courier is on his way to my office with your check." A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over Tom. He sank into a kitchen chair, the tension of the last 6 months draining out of him like a fever breaking. "Thank you, David. For everything." "Don't thank me," David said. "Thank your son. He did the real lawyering here." A week later, the surveillance camera on Karen's house was gone. The blinds on her illegal master bedroom were drawn, and remained that way. A strange, blessed quiet settled over the property line. The neighbors, likely having received a very different letter from the one Karen had intended, began to nod at Tom again. Mrs. Gable even stopped to compliment how nicely his new lawn was coming in. 2 more weeks passed. It was a perfect, crisp, autumn Saturday. Tom and Leo were in the backyard, finally building the fire pit they had talked about back in August. They were laying the final course of stones, working together in a comfortable, easy silence. The yard was theirs again. It was a sanctuary. Just as they were finishing, a white truck with the city's official seal on the door pulled up and parked directly in front of Karen's house. A man in a khaki uniform holding a thick file and a clipboard got out and walked, with purpose up her driveway. He rang the doorbell. Leo looked at his dad. "Did you—" Tom shook his head. "No, I didn't have to." He hadn't sent the file. He had the check for his legal fees, his title was clear, and the war was over. That was enough. He wasn't a vengeful man. The inspector rang the bell again, more insistently this time. Tom watched for a moment, a neutral observer to a karmic event set in motion long ago. He didn't know who had made the call. Maybe David, tying up a loose end. Maybe Leo, with the righteous fury of a son defending his father. Or maybe, and this was the thought Tom savored most, it was another neighbor. Another person who had been pushed too far by the Queen of Ridgewood Commons, who had finally been given the courage to pull a thread on her tapestry. It didn't matter. He turned his back on the scene, on the quiet, bureaucratic dismantling of Karen's perfect, rule-bound world. He picked up another stone and handed it to his son. "Here," he said. "Let's finish this." The soft clink of the stone settling into place was the only sound that mattered. It was the sound of rebuilding. It was the sound of peace.